All right, let's move on to authentication. So I'm going to build up a brand new project. We'll call it Laravel 6 again. We'll CD in there. And next, we're going to pull in a first-party package through Composer. Laravel require Laravel UI, and I will install this as a dev dependency. All right, so now if I run PHP Artisan, you'll see two new commands, UI auth, and if I scroll up, here's another one here, UI. Swap the front-end scaffolding for the application. All right, let's have a look. Help UI, and as the sole argument, we need the preset type, Bootstrap, Vue, or React. Now, we could choose any of these, and it doesn't really matter at all for this lesson, but I do like Vue, so we'll use that one. But I will include this auth flag to include scaffolding for registration and login pages and password resets and all of that stuff. All right. Finally, it wants us to install our development dependencies and then compile down your assets. All right, and we're all set to go. So now, before we look at this in the browser, a couple things. First, when we ran that command, it did add a handful of dependencies here, like jQuery, or Lodash, or Popper, or Sass, or Vue. Now, of course, you can tweak and remove these however you wish. But when we ran npm install, it did pull those in and it compiled them down. Okay, next, if you go to your resources views directory, we now have this new auth scaffolding. Again for login, registration, verification, password confirmations and resets, all of that stuff. And again, things like this are so common, it makes sense to automate the process. It takes a long time to write manually, so it's nice to have this ready to go. Okay, finally, one last thing. In your routes file, you'll see this section here. So we've added a home route for your dashboard, and then also the various routes for your registration system. Now, a little tip here. If you run PHP Artisan route list, you can view all registered routes for your project. So when we ran that UI command, it gave us all of these. All right, let's have a look. So again, we see the splash page, but we also now have these new login and registration links. Login, register. Let's set up John. Now we happen to know this won't quite work, right? If we run it, yeah, it's going to fail. And that's because, remember, this is a brand new project, and we haven't yet set up a database. Let's do that now. I'll go to Table Plus. I'll set up a connection, MySQL. We'll call it Laravel. The host of localhost is fine. Our username is root. The password is blank. We'll test it, and we're good to go. Okay, so now I will create a database, and we'll call it Laravel. There we go. So a quick note there, in your .env file, if we scroll up, this is what Laravel assumes by default, a connection of MySQL and a database name of Laravel. Of course, name this anything you want. We're just sticking with the default there. So now that we've set up our connection, I can migrate our database, and that'll build up those initial tables, and we can view those here. So of course, at the moment, the users table is blank, but not for long. If I give it a refresh, it'll send that data once again, and there we go. John Doe is now signed in. So when we filled out that form, it did a number of things. First, it persisted that new user. So we have an account. It hashed their password, and then it set John Doe as the authenticated user. And that's why he has access to this home route. Have a look. If I open up an incognito window, any guest cannot access that page. Let's figure out why. If we go to our routes file, we don't see any reference to authentication here, even though we could. Let's go down the pipe though. If the user visits /home, load a home controller. And sure enough, right there in the constructor, we can see this reference to a middleware called auth. So I'll show you, if we comment that out, just to prove it to you, any guest can now access this page. So how exactly does this work? Well, as it turns out, middleware is a little bit confusing. It's a little higher level, so we will dedicate a full lesson to understanding it. But for now, for the quick 60-second cliff notes, think of middleware like layers of an onion. So if you want to get to the core of the onion, or the core of your application, a user must first make their way through the various layers. You have to peel back those layers. So in this case, we're saying, all right, before the user can get to this action into this view, they must first make their way through this layer or middleware. And that middleware is called auth. You must be signed in order to make your way to the next layer of the onion. And that's how that works. So you can view all of the middleware here. And in fact, you can even create your own. And I'll show you all about that in a future lesson. But for now, all you need to know is this is how we confirm authentication. Now, real quick though, you can do it in two different ways. And I want to show you this because in the wild, you'll see both forms. So once again, right now, any guest can access this page. And that's because I've commented out that middleware. Alternatively, and I think even more common, in fact, you'll see middleware referenced in the routes file itself. And you can reference it by chaining to your main route. Now, if I come back and refresh, once again, you have to be authenticated to access that page. So John Doe is already registered. Let's have him sign in. And there we go. He can once again access that page. Now, once signed in, you can access information about the authenticated user like this. Let's go to that home dashboard. And right here where it says you are logged in, you'll see it there. Let's say you are logged in and then the person's name. So if we go to our database, we can access their name through this field here, name. So all we have to do is say auth, give me the authenticated user. And at that point, you have an instance of your user model. You have this. So let's just grab the user's name. And if I come back to Firefox and refresh, there you go. It works. Now, a quick note here though, sometimes you may see it referenced like this, and you may even see me do this, auth user name. Both are identical. You don't have to worry about it. You'll get the exact same thing. Now finally, one last quick thing. Let's go back to the home page. Sometimes you will want to display certain information or certain HTML if the user is signed in, but otherwise you should display nothing or something else. A common example of this would be some kind of call to action button or a banner. Okay, let's go to the welcome page. And I will say right up here, just as an example, Laravel, that corresponds to this. So what if we said, once again, hello, and we reference the user's name? We happen to know this will work, right? But be careful. This assumes you have an authenticated user, right? But what if you simulated a guest? Well, of course, it would blow up. And that's because when you call auth user, if you're not signed in, that's going to return null. So you're trying to call name on null, and of course, that's not allowed. So in situations like this, where a route or view is not locked behind a auth middleware, you need to confirm. You can do this in two ways. First, you could use a simple if directive, if auth user, or you could even do auth check. Check if we have an authenticated user. If that's the case, we could say auth user name, and once again, something like that. So if I refresh, well now, we're not signed in, so we don't see anything at all. Let's tweak it, else default to Laravel, like it was before. All right, so now guess will see this, or if you sign in and return to the home page, now you see the different heading. However, because this is so common, we can actually tweak this. Laravel provides a directive called auth for this very purpose. Auth and end auth. Okay, so now, I'm not going to show you, but you get the exact same thing, and it translates to basically the same check. Now sometimes though, you'll want to do the opposite. The opposite of auth is guest. So we could say, please sign in, like so. And of course, you could still do else. The same thing will work. So now if I refresh, we don't see anything because we're signed in. But again, for incognito users, they will see the correct heading. All right, that'll do it. You now have a full registration system in minutes.